Well, it's a pleasure to be with you this morning, and I've certainly enjoyed the hospitality that you've shown me here last night and today, looking after my wife and myself. The subject that we're looking at today is Jesus, Islam and the Gospel, and I want us to come away today being clear about these things. But I want to suggest to you that that's not an easy ask in today's world. It's not an easy ask. We live in a world which can be quite confusing when it comes to religion and, in fact, many other subjects. There are many voices that speak to us. There are our politicians who tell us about religion and what the true religion is. There are, of course, Hollywood celebrities who, being actors, are somehow qualified to tell us about other aspects of life. And they tell us about religion. Themes about religion and Islam also work themselves out in our TV dramas, don't they? And so there have been Australian TV dramas with Muslim characters to work out Islamic issues in the West for us. There are, of course, Facebook memes and videos that you can see. Compass will have, the ABC Compass program will have programs on Islam in various ways. And there'll be the discussion and debate when it comes to the Q&A program on Monday night. Verses may be quoted in the media, and of course the actions of the followers of various religions are also reported in the media. And so I want to say that when we look at all of that, learning about Jesus, Islam and the Gospel can be quite confusing as we hear these many different voices saying different things to us. Of course, it may not just be confusing for you. When you come to think about Islam, it also may be a little fearful. It may be something you fear about or even are angry when you see what is happening. You may take a slightly different approach in that you might say, well, whatever I do, I must not offend anybody. Or even go further and say, I must appease people so that I don't offend them at all. But I'm hoping that you today want to know something about these subjects of Jesus, Islam, and the Gospel. The way I'm going to be answering our question today is to be looking at the Bible and the Quran and Islamic writings, because one of the reasons why, as a culture, we are confused and not sure what to think about this is that as a Western culture, we now, by and large, don't know the Bible anymore, and so we don't know about Jesus and the Gospel, and we've never really known about Islam, and so we don't know the Quran, and so we don't know what to think about that. And so that's what I'm going to be wanting to look briefly at today, the Bible and the Quran and the Islamic writings. Now, I'm not going to try to be clear about everything. That would be very difficult, if not impossible. But I am aiming today to be clear about how we are saved in Christianity, in Islam. So I just want to look at one topic in Christianity and Islam. How are we saved? That is, how do we get to be with God? How do we go to heaven, however you may describe it? What does Christianity and Islam say about those subjects, about that subject? Now, Christians and Muslims may mean different things by salvation and heaven, but I'm just going to look at how we obtain them. That's what I'm wanting to do. And I particularly want to do this so that today you can make a decision. I want you to come away today being confident and being able to make a decision for Jesus will be the case that I'll be answering. But I'm going to put forward both cases. Now, the outline of my talk is as follows. I want us to be clear about Jesus. There are 4 points. I want us to be clear about Jesus. I want to be clear about Islam. I want to look at Muslims and the words of Jesus. And then I'm going to put forward a case for why Christianity is true and why you should follow Jesus. So let's look at the first of these, being clear about Jesus. In the Gospel of John, which we had read for us before, we read Jesus in chapter 14 where he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And these are very famous words of Jesus, famous in Christian history and amongst Christians, that Jesus is the only way to come to God. Now, what's the context here? Because understanding the context is very important. And if you have a Bible, please look with me on John chapter 14, verses 2 and 3. I'll read them out here. So Jesus says here, "In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I am going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, so that you also may be where I am." So here is Jesus describing about going away, and the context here is he's talking about what we might call heaven. Going away to prepare heaven for us. Now, heaven is described in different ways in the Bible. Sometimes it's spoken of as a giant temple. Sometimes it's spoken of as paradise. Sometimes as a city. Sometimes as a bride coming to her husband. It's described as a wedding. Sometimes it's described as the resurrection and the renewal of all things. On this occasion, Jesus describes heaven as a house with rooms. A house with rooms. And this is my first question for today. I want to ask you, do you have a room in God's house? Is there a room for you in God's house? Now, we need to be careful when we answer this because we don't want to assume something that may not be ours. What I mean by that is, if you were to come to my house and you came around for some afternoon tea, of which you would be welcome, but if you just said, "I'm just going to take one of these rooms and now live in here, live in one of the rooms of your house," that would be going too far, wouldn't it? It would be assuming something that's not yours. And that's how some people are with God. They just assume that, people give me all types of things in this world, or the politicians want to give me things. God wants to give me things. God will give me anything I want. And if of course he'll let me in. But that's being presumptuous. You see, my children know that they have a room in my house. Now, why do they know that they have a room in my house? Well, because they saw me paint the room. They saw me get the room ready. They know that a room was prepared for them. They call me Father, and so they know they have a room in my house. You see, Jesus prepares the room for you in God's house. By ourselves, we actually don't have a room in God's house. We are strangers to God's house. But Jesus is the one who prepares the room, and he can give you the room. This is why he says of himself, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." Now, the reason he can give us this room is because of this verse I've just read. And I want us to go through this. I want us to look at the way, the truth, and the life, and to see what these mean about Jesus. Here Jesus is saying he is the way to God. And when people say that Jesus is the only way, very often people say, well, that's not such a nice thing to say, that Jesus is the only way. It's being a bit too exclusive. But even for those people who admit, even for those people who may believe that there are many ways to God, they still acknowledge that there are some ways which are not the right way. For instance, people who say that any path is the right way to God, if you say to them, well, is doing evil a path to God? They'll go, no, of course, that's not a way. Right? So it's not that they accept every way. But that actually gives us a problem because sin and evil is everywhere. Consider this. There is sin and evil in our own lives, us individually. We fail at things that we know we should do. We lie and think thoughts that we'd be ashamed if other people heard. And we do this regularly. We can't get away from it. We're corrupted by sin. We're not the way. But it's also within our families, isn't it? Within all of our families, I'm sure that I could go through every family here, and there is trouble and hardship and destruction that has come about within our family groups because of sin. See, sin's affected us individually, it's affected us as families. But of course, it also affects us as nations. In Australia, we have our history with the Indigenous people here. In the US, they have their history with the slave trade. Now, they're the ones we're familiar with. But you know what? When I've looked at every other nation, they've all got a similar history where they've all done the same types of things to other people. We talk about our own, but when you go and investigate anybody else, they've been enslaving, they've been treating other people horrendously. Every nation on the earth has been corrupted by sin in some way. What about science? Is science the hope for the future? Is that the way? No, science is corrupted by sin. Because the topics that are brought up and the morality that goes behind the scientific method, and particularly in the social sciences, is very biased towards the agenda that people have. And the areas that are studied, the results that are published, are affected by sin. Science is not this neutral project that we're involved in. The education system, is education free from sin? No, the education system is thoroughly corrupted by sin. We've had abuse within the education system. The agendas that are put forward are very often just according to the latest fad and fashion, which change over the centuries if you study the educational method. And the things that are being taught to our children today are things that worry and concern many people, that people would see as evil. Of course, our governments are not the way either. Right? We need our governments, we need our education, but all of these things have been corrupted by sin. And so within our governments, we're always having to have commissions, aren't we? And then we'll have a problem within some section of government, and so we set up a watchdog to go over them. We saw this in the financial institution. There was a watchdog that was meant to be watching over the banks. It didn't do its job, so we've got to have a watchdog over the watchdog to keep the banks accountable. You know what I mean? Like within our government system, it actually doesn't work because we're corrupted by sin. The sporting field, well, sport is corrupted by sin. There's gambling, and I'm often reading in the paper just about how there was a recent network of even within tennis where there were games being fixed, and I know of cricket where games are being fixed. You see, sport is corrupted by sin. Entertainment is corrupted by sin. In fact, it seems to me that entertainment is based on a lot of sin in our Western world. And it's even within the church. Within the church, we've had the corruption within our leadership. We've had, within some particular sections of the Christian church more than others, we've had child abuse, which has just been ignored and caused huge damage to people's lives. Right? Religion is corrupted by sin. You see, there is not a place in this world that you can go. There is not a way in this world that is not corrupted by sin. And sin is not the way. Sin is not the way to God. And sin is absolutely everywhere. But you know, there's one place where there's not sin, and that's Jesus. Hallelujah. There's one place there is not sin. There is one place you can look and see and say, there is no sin here. There is no sin here. Right? There is no other way except this man, Jesus. Jesus says here, who of you can accuse me of sin? And the testimony of his disciples was that this man was free from sin. And this is why he is the way. This is why when he dies on the cross, he dies as the innocent man, the man who has no sin of his own, but he can bear your sin. And that's why he can be the way. Now, no other prophet has done anything like this. Jesus is the way in which nobody else is the way. Jesus also speaks of himself as being the truth. Now, prophets are men and women from God who speak the truth. They speak the word of God. But that's not what Jesus is saying of himself here. Let me read to you chapter 14, verses 8 and 9. Philip said, "Lord, show us the Father, and that will be enough for us." Jesus answered, "Don't you know me, Philip, even after I've been among you for such a long time? Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? You see, Jesus is not just saying, I speak the word of God. Jesus is saying, if you see me, you have seen God. When you come to me, you encounter God. It's very different, isn't it? He's not just speaking the truth. He doesn't just say, I speak the truth. He says, I am the truth. That's a different category. That's a different category altogether. Again, no other prophet has ever said anything like this. And this is why Jesus is the way. He just doesn't speak the truth. He is the truth. You come to him and you encounter God directly. He also speaks of himself as the life. Now, there are many different expressions of life in this world, aren't there? I haven't been to the Great Barrier Reef, but I'm sure, like you've seen pictures of it. And it's got these magnificent colours of all the corals and the fish. And it's amazing. And you think, I'd love to go snorkeling there, except for the sharks, which I know probably aren't there, but I'm still worried about them. And, you'd love to go and just experience that. But there's also life in the most harsh places. So when you go into the middle of Australia where there's, these harsh deserts, there are frogs. Do you know there are frogs in the desert of Australia? And these frogs make themselves a cocoon, a watertight cocoon, and they live in the ground for years. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that an absolutely amazing expression of life? The rain comes, the cocoons dissolve, they come out, they feed, they breed, they live their life cycles out, then they go back into the ground. Now, that is amazing. You see, and I haven't even thought about humans yet and the amazing things that humans can do. We're corrupted by sin, but yet we still are in the image of God and do amazing things. You see, there are these amazing expressions of life that God has made. But that's not what Jesus is saying about himself. Jesus is not saying, I'm an amazing expression of life. There's the Great Barrier Reef, there's the frog in the desert, there's the human achievements that you can do, and then there's me, and I'm a pretty good expression of life too. Jesus is not saying he's an expression of life. Jesus is saying he is the life. Jesus is saying he is what gives life to the Great Barrier Reef. He is what gives life to the frog in the desert. He is the one who gives life to you. That's what Jesus is saying. He's the one who gives you your life. And so this is why he is the way. Again, no other prophet ever said anything like this. This is why Jesus can give you a room in God's house. This is an exclusive claim that Jesus is making here, that he is the way, the truth, and the life because of who he is and what he can do. Now, if you're not a Christian here today, maybe you've come along for the Easter service to visit church, and maybe you've got a Christian friend who's annoyed you in some way. Sometimes our Christian friends can annoy us, and they may have annoyed you by saying something like, Jesus is the only way. Well, I want to say to you that your Christian friend isn't making that up. It's not just that your Christian friend is overstating things. This is actually what Jesus says about himself. Jesus himself says that he is the only way. And I want to say to you tonight, if you're not a Christian, come to Jesus. Come to him. He is the way, the truth, and the life, and he will give you a place in God's house. Okay, I want us to move on to our second point now. That's the longest point that we've had, but we're going to look at being clear about Islam and how a person is saved or comes to be with God in Islam. Now, in Islam, it's very different. You can do it in Islam. Islam teaches that we are born pure and clean from sin. Sin has not corrupted our nature. It is not who we are. It's just something we may do. The goal of life is to stay clean. Some people do this well, like the prophets. Others, not so good at doing it. We sin because God has made us weak and other people lead us astray. What we need is guidance so that we can do the good deeds that we need to. So that's sort of the basis of Islamic thought. Now, in Islam, Allah does not simply forgive. Muslims may say, oh, Allah is the forgiving, but you actually have to earn Allah's mercy. So we're going to have a few verses from the Quran now. And God has promised to those who believe and do righteous deeds, they will have forgiveness and a great reward. You see, you need to believe and do the righteous deeds, and forgiveness is a reward of paradise in Islam. What you need to do is accumulate enough good deeds so that you can enter paradise. Then those whose scales are heavy with good deeds, they are the successful. And those whose scales are light are those who lose their souls in hell abiding. And so it's a fairly simple system in Islam. You need to do enough good deeds so that on the scales you'll have enough good deeds to go to paradise. Now this actually leads to 3 different ways of being saved in Islam, and we're going to go through them quickly. And these are 3 different paths. Often Christians are taught that they need to ask their Muslim friends, have you done enough good deeds to be saved? That's actually not the right question to ask a Muslim. You're going to see, you need to ask them, what path are they on? That will actually speak to them far more. Let's look at this first path. There's one path in the Quran of those who go straight to paradise. Now these are the jihadists who die on jihad, die as martyrs. If you are killed or die in God's way, pardon and mercy from God are better than what they collect. If you die or are killed, you'll be gathered up to God. And so within Islamic thought, the martyrs don't go to the grave, they go straight to paradise. In fact, you're not even to think of them as dead. That's the first way, the way of the martyr. The second way, and this is the way that most Muslims will think, is that you go into the grave, then you're in the grave for a while, and then hopefully you'll accumulate enough good deeds through various sources so that you can then go to paradise. So during your life, you will do the rituals of doing the pillars of Islam, saying the confession of faith, fasting during Ramadan, the pilgrimage to Mecca, saying the prayers during the day, and giving of money to Islamic causes. So you'll do those good things while you're alive. You didn't die as a martyr, but so you're going to the grave, but hopefully you'll have enough good deeds, and then other people can do good deeds for you. So I've got a Muslim friend who did this for his mother. Narrated Ibn Abbas, this is Muhammad's cousin, he said, a man came to the Prophet Muhammad and said, "O Allah's apostle, my mother died and she ought to have fasted 1 month, for she missed Ramadan, fasting during Ramadan. Shall I fast on her behalf?" The Prophet replied in the affirmative and said, Allah's debts have more right to be paid. Now that's interesting, isn't it? There's actually a whole range of things you can do in Islam that you do on behalf of other people when they're dead, and it gets credited to them. And so this leads to another way that you can be saved. You do your good deeds yourself. You didn't die as a martyr or a jihadist, so you've gone into the grave. You haven't gone straight to paradise. Hopefully other people can do good deeds for you, and then hopefully you'll make it from there. The last way is where you actually go to hell. And I was speaking with a young Muslim girl who said, I'll go to paradise, but I'll go to hell first. And this is how they think. Whoever during their life said, none has the right to be worshipped but Allah, and has in his heart good faith equal to the weight of a barley grain, will be taken out of hell. So there are these 3 paths. If you didn't have enough good deeds during your own time, you go into the grave, you go to the hell, and then people haven't done enough good deeds for you to be credited to you, then once you've been in hell for a while, you'll get taken out. And so you end up with a diagram like this. And again, if you've got a Muslim friend, you need to ask them which path they're on. And this is where they lack assurance. Muslims, generally they don't lack assurance that they'll make it to paradise. They lack assurance to know how they will get there. And once you ask that question of what path are you on, you're then actually speaking their language and you understand what they're saying back to you. You see, Allah has done nothing to save you, and so it's up to you to take one of these paths to save yourself. Now, I hope you can see from this that Christianity and Islam have very different ways of being saved. Right? Now, I haven't put forward one as true and the other as false yet. I'm just saying there are very different ways. All religions are not the same. You can't come away from this saying they're the same. In Christianity, it's just Jesus who saves. In Islam, you need to be saving yourself, and you will take one of these paths. Now, how is it that Muslims, this is my third point, how is it that Muslims respond to Jesus' words? We've looked at the two different paths. How is it that Muslims respond when they hear Jesus saying, I am the way, the truth and the life? Because Muslims are meant to accept Jesus as a prophet, and Muslims are aware of his words. And very often Muslims will talk about Jesus saying, I am the way and the truth and the life. But they interpret them very differently. What Muslim leaders say is they say that these words are true, but they are true of any prophet at the time of that prophet. So, and you can sort of see the sense behind that. So Moses was, the way at his time, and Jesus was certainly, you had to listen to him at his time. And of course, Muhammad is now the last one, and we're in the time of the prophet Muhammad, so you've got to follow him. So what Jesus said about being the way, the truth and the life is true of any prophet at the time of that prophet. Now that sounds fine until you think about it. Because if you actually go and look at the prophets, that's not what they say. Come with me, please, to Mark chapter 1, which we had read for us before. And we meet a whole lot of prophets there. We meet Isaiah, we meet Malachi, Isaiah, John, and Jesus. And let me just read to you from Mark chapter 1, verse 2. It is written in Isaiah the prophet, I will send my messenger ahead of you who will prepare the way, a voice of one calling in the desert, prepare the way for the Lord, make straight paths for him. See, here's the prophet Isaiah speaking. Now, is Isaiah saying that he's the way? No. Isaiah's not saying he's the way. He's saying, I'm preparing the way for the Lord. The Lord's the way, and I'm preparing for you to meet him. Isaiah's pointing people to someone else rather than himself. What about John the Baptist? Did John the Baptist say, I am the way, the truth and the life? Did John point people to him? Well, of course not. Because John the Baptist said, after me will come one more powerful than I, the thongs of whose sandals I am not worthy to stoop down and untie. I baptize you with water, he will baptize you with the Holy Spirit. John pointed people to Jesus. John didn't point people to himself. You see, in fact, when you go through all the prophets of the Bible, none of them are pointing people to themselves. They are always pointing people to God and to the salvation that God will bring. They're pointing people to Jesus. So it's simply not true to say that what Jesus says of himself in John 14:6, that he is the way, the truth and the life, that is true of every prophet. It's simply not true. It's not even true of Muhammad. Muhammad never even said that of himself. Jesus says that of himself. When Muslim leaders read these verses this way, they are imposing an Islamic understanding upon themselves. They're trying to read these verses from the Bible as if they're verses of the Quran, but they're not. They need to read these verses in terms of what Jesus said and what all the prophets said. Now, my final point is, why should we believe the Christian position? I don't know where everyone's coming from tonight. Why should you believe the Christian position? I've spelt out what the Christian position is. I've spelt out what the Islamic position is, but I haven't really said to you why the Christian one is true. I've just put them forward there. Just get my last slide up here. I want to say that the reason why the Christian position is true and the Islamic position is not is because of what the Bible is and what the Quran is. So let me just explain to you now what the Quran is. The Quran is what Muhammad recited. It's the words of Muhammad that he recited in response to different situations in his life. It has no books of the Bible in it. Right? The Quran is just one man, Muhammad, and what he recited. There are no books of the Bible in it. He uses Bible stories. So he's heard the Bible and he talks about Bible characters, but the law of Moses is not in there. The book of Psalms is not in there. The book of Isaiah is not in there. It's just one man. And in fact, Islam is completely based on one man. The Hadith are some other books. I won't go into those now, but this is the Islamic canon. It's all based on one man. And so when what Muslims believe about Jesus and the prophets comes from one man. They don't read the law of Moses. What they believe about Moses comes from what Muhammad tells them about Moses. They don't read the law of Moses, the first 5 books. When they say they believe in David, that doesn't mean they read the Psalms of David. It means they listen to what Muhammad tells them about David. And so everything Muslims believe about all the prophets comes from one man's interpretation of all these prophets. In this way, Islam is exactly the same as the Baha'i religion, if you're familiar with it. The Baha'i religion accepts Muhammad as a prophet. It accepts Jesus as a prophet. It accepts Moses. But the Baha'is only believe what their prophet says about Moses, says about Muhammad. You understand my point? It's one man's religion, one man telling you everything. Now, the Bible's very different to that. You see, the Bible is a collection of many books from many prophets over about a 1,500-year period. It comes from different locations, written in different languages. And what Christians believe about God does not come from one man, but it actually comes from all of the prophets. Now, this is something that as Christians we can take for granted. I remember a Muslim came to my church one day and we're having a series on the Psalms. And he said to me, why did you have a sermon on the Psalms? And I said, well, we're working our way through the Psalms at the moment. And he said, no, why did you have a sermon on the Psalms? And I said, well, we just work through books of the Bible and we're doing Psalms at the moment, and that's just what we did. And he said, no. He said, the Psalms have got nothing to do with Christianity. This is how they think. They think David had the Psalms, Jesus has the gospel's sort of the Bible. They have no idea what's actually in it. You see, what we do as Christians is amazing. You just take it for granted that you have a Bible study on the Psalms. You take it for granted that you read Genesis to your children. That is amazing. Because the other religions of the world don't do that. They have one man who teaches you what to believe about everybody else. Whereas in Christianity, we read all of the prophets. And what we believe about God comes from all the prophets. And the message of all the prophets points us to Jesus. The prophets speak about the fatherhood and the sonship of God. The prophets all the way through speak about how we're corrupted by sin. You follow the history of the nation of Israel. It's how sin has made us unable to save ourselves. We read about the idea of the substitutionary sacrifice long before Christianity. Christians didn't invent the idea of a sacrifice for sin. It comes from all the prophets beforehand. As we go throughout every single Christian teaching, we see that it is rooted and founded in 1,500 years of prophets before Jesus. That is, Christianity is not based on one man, it is based on all of the prophets, and they point us to Jesus. And this is why I contend for you that Christianity is true. To conclude now, this morning we've been considering the topic of Jesus, Islam and the gospel. And I hope you've now got enough information to make a decision at least one point. Again, I'm not trying to answer everything, but just looking at one point. And that is, how is it that you personally should be saved? I hope you can see that the Christian position is the true position. If you are a Christian, then I want to encourage you that what you believe is the message of all of the prophets of God. Over 1,500 years, different locations, different languages, one unified message pointing us to Jesus, coming to its fulfillment with him. Be confident in what you believe. Be amazed at the unity of Scripture and stick with it and don't let anyone take you from it, and share it with confidence to those around you. If you're not a Christian, then I hope you can see that what Christians believe is not just based on one man. It's not just some little thing that just blew in. It's not some little insignificant thing, that some idea that one person had that just took off. It's actually the fulfillment of the message of all the prophets of God. And there is nothing like this in any other religion. And this is why Jesus said, I am the way, the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Amen.